Hey everybody, it's Miss A, and I am putting, here is the review for Unit 1 video and homework. HW is homework. So we will be taking our test tomorrow on Unit 1. Unit 1 was geometry. So the topics that we learned about were lines of symmetry. And the students can review all the videos, lines of symmetry. We talked about angles. We talked about triangles. We talked about quadrilaterals. We talked about line segments, rays, angles, patterns. So these were the items that we talked about. So let's go ahead and do a review video. The students will have to be able to identify lines of symmetries and shapes. So identify lines of symmetry in shapes and in letters. So shapes and letters. So for example, if I have this shape, I would have to be able to identify the lines of symmetry. So I could see that if I do this, if it was drawn correctly, the right and left would be symmetrical. If I were to do this, the top and bottom would be symmetrical. If I were to do this, the diagonal would be symmetrical, and here the diagonal would be symmetrical. So if this was a symmetrical shape, you could see that all of the all the lines of symmetry, you'd need to be able to identify those. We also need to be able to identify symmetry in letters. So for example, the letter H, when it is drawn like this with the middle part right in the middle, this would have a horizontal line of symmetry, a diagonal line of symmetry, and that would be it. So we'd have to be able to identify. So that's two of the things that they'll be asking them to do. They'll also be asking them to identify the figures. So for example, this is a point, and they would need to be able to identify that. This is a ray. One endpoint and an arrow is a ray. This is a line. Two arrows. This is a line segment. No arrows. This is an angle. It has a vertex. So they will need to be able to identify those items. They will also need to be able to identify triangles by their angles. So for example, if I have this particular triangle, and remember I showed the children using the little piece of the paper, the edge. See how the corner right there, I could put that corner here, you see how it fits in? So this is a right angle. And then if I were to do that here, I could see that this is smaller than this piece of paper, so this is an acute angle. And I could do the same thing here, taking my little edge, and I can see that, you see how it comes on the paper there? This is an acute angle. So I can identify that a right triangle has one right angle and two acute angles. Here's my same, here's another triangle. If I place my corner's edge, my little piece of my test right there, I can see that this is greater than that corner, so this is an obtuse angle. And I could place this here. I can see that this is an acute angle, and I can place this here, and this is an acute angle. So I know that an obtuse triangle has one obtuse angle and two acute angles. And then we all know that a acute triangle is acute because all three angles are acute. So they need to be able to identify triangles by the types of angles that they have. They will need to be able, let me go to a new piece of paper, they will need to be able to identify patterns. Patterns such as something like this. And they will need to be able to figure out the next thing that goes in the pattern. So for example, this one, if we were missing 3 more spots, it was blank, lined, colored in, blank, lined, colored in, and that should be blank. So they'd have to be able to identify that. They will also need to be able to identify quadrilaterals by all their names. By all names. For example, if I have a square, we know that the attributes, the identifying attributes of a square are 2 sets of parallel lines, 4 lines the same, same length, and 4 right angles. So now I'm looking at what quadrilaterals also qualify as a square or would be a rectangle, because a rectangle has 2 sets of parallel lines and 4 right angles, and it would also be a quadrilateral. So a quadrilateral, a rectangle, and a square. It could also be considered a parallelogram because a parallelogram has 2 sets of parallel lines. Parallelogram. So this particular shape has 4 different names that it could be called. They would need to be able to recognize that. They need to be able to recognize angles. So they have to use the little edge of the paper or use their ability to recognize. So obviously if I have something that looks like this, if I were to place my little piece of corner, my squared edge, I could see that that makes a square. This is a right angle. If I have something that looks like this, and I place my squared edge at my vertex, and I can see that it is greater than my yellow piece of paper, this is an obtuse angle. And I can place my...
please call the front office. Please call the front office.
I can place my piece of corner in here, and I can see that the line comes underneath. This is an acute angle. They would need to be able to identify those as well. All right, so that is the review. Now let's do the homework and this can be turned in for extra credit on the test. So it would be for 5 extra credit points. So the first one is identify the pattern. So they would need their name, the date, and Unit 1 EC. That way I know. And it is worth 5 extra credit points on their test, 5 points if completed. So identify the pattern is the first set. All right, so that is the first one, to identify the pattern. Identify the angle. So that's the second one. Identify the angle. Identify the number of lines of symmetry. How many acute angles are in an obtuse triangle? So that is their homework. It is extra credit, 5 points. Identify the pattern, identify the angle, identify the number of lines of symmetry for each one of these, and then how many acute angles are in an obtuse triangle. All right, I hope this video helps. I'll go ahead and let this record a few more seconds so that way you can have it there and pause it if you need it. Thanks for watching, everybody.